The whiteboard, the central tool to family communication without having to use your vocals or, God forbidden, short term memory and getting messages across. I believe this idea of using a whiteboard would be wise to practice not just in every family household, but every household in general. I preach an idea that doesn't particularly project any end goal, the board fills itself out. Especially for children, a community dry erase board helps reinforce regularity and consistency in their lives. And for you, the parent, this can save you the sanity of being asked the same question 10 times a day. There have been 3 different size whiteboards I've purchased over the years. So many ideas have been projected onto them that I had to increase their size twice. And the current size is still not big enough for all the ideas that I've been projected on it. In fact, at this point, it would be nice to have a community whiteboard that everybody can fill in, food, etc., and then sort of a parental or um, adult whiteboard to put in reminders or dates or other notices. While I would encourage users to try one out and see how well it functions in the household with their own ideas that are just naturally, organically brought up in their family, I will throw in some of my own implementations that I have used in the past. The whiteboard has also become a tool to make my own life easier as well, as it serves just as much of a reminder to children as it does to kids reminding me. So I'm just going to give a few examples and perhaps I'll fill in the box here. Um, my least favorite question is what's for dinner? And you can set a box though for every day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or just, put in something like, um, you know, today and then tomorrow. And I'll probably say this again at some point, but uh, one of the main things with using a whiteboard is you have many different ways of communicating, different handwriting, big handwriting, small handwriting. So by all means, space is imperative to using one. So if we say today is, let's say, chicken parmesan, and that, there you go, it's right there. Um, so basically, there was a point where I would encourage them to just fill the box themselves. Meaning, if they asked the questions, then I would initiate and ask them to write it on the board for everyone else to see and remind themselves when they inevitably forget. So, the other one, and this is probably the biggest and requires the most amount of space on a whiteboard. Um, if you have a whiteboard that's basically 3 feet by, let's say, 2 feet, it can easily take half of it, and that's shopping lists. So, instead of having sort of a piece of paper plotting what I'll get at store A, B, and C, Walmart and Whole Foods per se, I would just have it on the board and, let's say the child's favorite thing was mac and cheese, or ramen or something. So then they would just put, oh, hey, we're out of mac and cheese. I certainly want, more of that. So, they'll put it on the board. Certainly, I mean, if they're gonna put things like candy, that's a totally different deal. But, um, so basically, all you do is you have this box set aside, and you just have put food on the top or whatever, and they'll know because there'll be other food there, and then they'll just put, whatever food items that they might need. Um, so I usually will just do it based on bullet point for the whiteboard. I think you could also do it where you put the specific stores that you shop at. So, if let's say something's at Whole Foods or Walmart, then they'll put under the appropriate box, assuming that they've gone shopping with you at some point. Um, for shopping trips, often I basically I only have to copy and paste the list on the board. Put it on the sort of notes on a smartphone, or just take a photo of it and go to the store to restock. It's just this way, there's very minimal amount of checking through and siphoning the kitchen goods and what is there and what isn't there, especially with condiments when you go shopping. So the other one I would recommend is upcoming dates, sort of vacations, recitals, appointments, no school days, etc. So I don't think that needs a huge box, but since I only have so much space, you could just say, 10/26 concert. And that's just a reminder for the parents of, you know, when to be home, or if something is required. I think on that note too, if the kids need a parent to sign something, or if the kids have a project to do, it's probably something that might be worth putting on the board to remind the parents. A lot of times I found that the kid will tell the parents that, something is due in 2 weeks, and it'll be forgotten, and the kid won't bring it up again. And when they, the teacher calls, what'll happen is the parent will say, the kid will say, excuse me, well, I told you once 2 weeks ago, because it wasn't plotted anywhere. And certainly if you're, on the more unorganized side, or you don't know how to organize, this is an easy way, to establish these things that ensure sort of the importance between the kid and the adult. So displaying temporary rules or rules that have been forgotten. For example, the kitchen counters has become a personal responsibility toss stash for the kids' belongings. If they're leaving stuff on the counters, if they're leaving, their shoes, indoors, if they're tracking mud, let's say something like that. If they're leaving electronics out, like headphones on the floors, or a kid forgets to clean up their food mess, etc. I usually won't give them a consequence for these things because they're easily to forget. So if you'll just put something that says like, well, taking shoes off is definitely one of the hardest, but put away dishes, or or something that you reminded them, a dozen times, and it's still not being done. By the point that I'll put it on a reminder, that's the part where I think, the issue needs to be communicated more clearly, and perhaps there needs to be some discussion or form of consequence if it's been just neglected and, become a big issue. But, for the most part, if some kid's putting the, leaving their clothes on the bathroom, it's a much smaller problem and scale, and requires lots of reminding and lots of teaching anyway, something that might be beyond something like this. Moving on. So again, temporary rules. I'm going to note here that I believe like a full-blown chores list fits on its own regular paper printed table than a whiteboard. This is the first parenting video I made on creating a chores list. So unless it's like a one-time task or a cleaning project that they're doing, something like that could be here. So if you're going to do like, spring cleaning, as a reminder to everyone that, oh yeah, this Sunday, on, when is spring? Let's say 3/28. That it's on the board there as a reminder. Again, this is going to look a little cluttered. You'll have everything boxed up, and it'll certainly be a lot bigger, such as the closed list. And this is where it becomes the problem that you need pretty much an immense amount of space to use something like this. So I would, put it on your wall at your house, and preferably use a big board. I'll put one in the description. So again, if you're, unless you're talking about a big date, a big project, something like the spring cleaning or the concert, some one-off deal, I would just use a chores list for the sort of daily stuff. Plus you have the fact that, people will walk by this and they'll accidentally smudge something, and eventually it will get erased if it's not accomplished. Most of this is, somewhere between short-term memory and medium-term memory, stuff that's going to be done within a week or so, a day or so, a few hours or so. And then basically once it's done, once you buy the mac and cheese, you just erase it. Once the concert's done, you erase it, and there's more space. In my experience, when the thing gets over cluttered, perhaps like it might seem on this tiny whiteboard I'm using for display, it'll get used less and less because it'll just be too jumbled and people won't be looking at it anymore. So, like any form of organization, the cleaner it is, the more people are inclined to use that. Whereas the more disorganized it is, the more likely people are just to ignore it and put it in the back of their head. So again, reminders, greeting, notes, messages to kids/parents. If room, I try and leave in sort of an empty box for this. In some cases too, I think, I mean, like something like the reminder, something like, let's say kids aren't putting away their dishes, that I'll usually leave there for like a month. Especially if it's something that's been, I've reminded them 10,000 times and it's still not being consistently done. But certainly like the dates, the concerts, the hey, you forgot something, or don't forget this, those type of reminders. I'll usually leave like a bigger box on the bottom just to put those, and those will usually get erased probably within 24, 48 hours. um and I think that's certainly one of the joys of it for me is in erasing the thing that you've accomplished. So especially with a big shopping trip. So it's important to resolve uh, a whiteboard to your specific ones. Do you want several whiteboards for different focuses, or just one big one like the one I probably use? Do you want one that the children can use or edit, and another for parental use / reminders only, kind of like how I mentioned? One the kids can use, one the adults can use. With one big whiteboard, you can draw lines to separate the ideas, as you can see here. Will the whiteboard have magnets and be the correct size to fit on the fridge, or will it need to be hung up on the wall? The fridge I have does not have magnetism. Not, it seems like less do now. I'm not really sure on this, but certainly, if you can't put it on a convenient place near the kitchen, like the fridge, I would recommend putting it on a wall and just screwing it in. So whiteboards drilled into a wall that have a tray on the bottom are prone to having people run into the corners of them. It's worth noting that this can be a hazard. Sort of the ones that will have the tray will use the sort of the marker that hangs on the bottom. Those ones I probably would not recommend in general, since they're a hazard. I think it's also worth noting, if you put it on the wall, especially when the kids are younger and might want to just doodle a dragon on it or something, that if you put the dry erase board, or excuse me, the dry erase marker on the top, if you hang it on a wall, like if it's like 5 feet up, they're less likely to get it. Now, if you're not there and they can get a chair, obviously, creativity will ensue. But in other cases, that's my idea. I think it's also worth noting that sometimes it's nice to put the markers up top, 5, 6 feet above you, above the floor, because kids are notorious for closing the markers about that, and they actually end up drying out because they haven't snapped it shut. This one's definitely, is an easier one to push in, but still, most of the time they won't do the and stomp it in there. So the other thing is, make sure the whiteboard is at a height where the children can see it. Adults can write on it, or if the children are as well, then they can too. And depending on the age of the child, whether you want them to be able to write on it at all. So again, that kind of goes with the theme of what I just discussed on how high you want it, and whether you want to be able to put it up here or on a tray. Again, be careful with the tray. But so where the board succeeds, though, is in the infancy of any idea. Some may feel inclined to denounce its value and sort of drop it on the spot. For example, there's no need for a shopping list right now. It's too much effort to organize a calendar on the wall and flip it each month, etc. So, certainly if you're like, on the Myers-Briggs, like more perceiving, which is typically associated with being less organized versus the judging form of the spectrum. I believe that's the same on the Big Five. I can't remember at the moment, but if you're certainly less organized, and you're less likely to fill out a calendar every year, now I think more people just use it on their the calendar function on their phone. You could certainly have something here, even down to where you have a box for each day of the week, or even the whole dry erase board is a calendar, that can be filled in with stuff. But, I think certainly the whole point of what I meant earlier was that, those short-term ideas, I think psychology says that people on average can only have about 5 to 9 thoughts in their short-term memory. So it's easy that, when someone runs out of mac and cheese or cake or cheese or sour cream, that it's much easier to just put it on the board and forget its existence until you go shopping than it is to try and remember it for later or anything like that. So, again, that I think where this is best is certainly someone that's not mega organized, and someone that's needs needs to purge something from their short or medium term memory. This is the method to purge it for everyone to see it and to translate it into whatever you'll end up using it for later. Whether it's a reminder or some duty that needs to be done. So there is not an easier way to get plans across than this whiteboard method that I have found, because half the time the idea is being crowdsourced and or written by someone else using it. So again, you get this benefit because everyone's filling on the board, because certainly Molly might want mac and cheese, so of course she's going to put it on the board because it's important to her. And while it might not be important to me as a parent because I don't like the yellow dye that they use or something like that, at least it's communicated across where I can either discuss it with the kid, if they put something like gummy worms on there, or, I'll just go out and buy it. So again, all these ideas are being crowdsourced by everyone in the household willing to use it. Therefore, all these ideas are definitely being, sort of mass communicated without sort of a big discussion or some shopping list that needs to be filled out on the fridge. So eyes are definitely inclined to scan the changes that are made on the board when changes are made upon it. I've also found that the most common area for people to reflect on and use the board is near the kitchen. As I said earlier, I think kitchen's the place where people tend to meet, especially around dinner, and then it's just an area where everybody can at least glance at the board once a day. So, especially if you've said something like, Molly, don't forget your water bottle. I can put it very short and sweet, Molly, water bottle, and hopefully when she glances at it that morning or that night, she remembers to put it in her backpack. So, it's worth noting that the less filled that it is, especially, something like the shopping list is probably going, unless you've just gone shopping, that's going to be filled. But for the area, where you have the sort of short-term, 24, 48-hour notifications, if it's constantly being erased and rewritten, I've found that people will look at it more often if it's not a cluttered nightmare mess that's not being sort of destroyed and renewed. So it's the most efficient I can think of for achieving simple goals. And even under the point of telling it straight to the person, there's a great chance in the mind's impermanence for getting during busy schedules of schoolwork, extracurriculars, sleep schedules, etc. Added, it beats an ease of writing paper notes. So, something like sticky notes, or even, if you're like taping a kitchen, a buy list, that something like that's much more easy to get torn, forgotten and unused, and plus there's a lot more maintenance in putting up a paper list every time you go shopping. So I think it's easy though to distrust children though when using a community board. It's easy to think that they will erase the board's contents in frustration, draw inappropriate pictures, or only request candy on the shopping list, all of things of which have happened before. While this might be an issue for children around 8 and under, though, and that can often be remedied by manipulating the board's height, as I said, more often than not, I have seen grade school children and above want to act like and be as much acting like an adult as possible. More often than not, I have seen in times of stress, children can be the most adaptable and the first willing to step up to help and take part of a community role. And I think, certainly inputting sort of responsibility on a board like this without having, a 10-20 minute discussion when you've got to get dinner on and put kids to bed, etc. It's an easy way for them to feel like they're part of that responsibility. Innately, as a parent, it's typically best to project this trust towards the child, or else they may adopt the same distrust that you project before their brain can separate self from other as well. And note, younger kids do have a knack for like I said, forgetting to reinsert the dry erase marker caps, so you might have to buy a box of a dozen or so, or just put them at a higher point. I have temporarily banned children from using the markers from the past before by just putting the markers on top of the board or hiding them where it sits on the wall out of reach. That is until I learned to um, until they learn to grab a stick in order to slide the marker down off the whiteboard top, or grab a chair. I'll put a link in the description on the current board I use. Again, I would recommend this as another idea next to the sort of chores list. And perhaps even, you know, my highest recommendation with this is obviously the shopping list. I think dinner's a good one, and then certainly sort of notification reminders. You know, with the shopping list and the notification reminders taking up the vast bulk of the board. You know, so again, something like, 2 feet to, 3 feet of the board for each of them. And, but at the same time, I think, even if you just put the board up there and let, people put their ideas on it until you can get it, organized by, simple little boxes, I think it'll naturally just fill itself, over time. And certainly, if someone has to go do something at a moment's notice, they can always put that, I'm gone, I'll be back in an hour, I'll be back at, 5 p.m. or something. So, I would highly recommend this. Please use it. I think it will make an unorganized person's life much more organized, and it'll help communication, which is definitely one of the most important things between a parent and child. Really an important thing between anything, but anyways, hopefully this helps someone. Thank you for your time. Cheers.